Hello and welcome to my channel. In this video, I will be discussing Sunreach and ReDawn, which are the first two novellas in the Skyward Flight novella series that is directly a part of the Skyward series, and these are by Brandon Sanderson with Janci Patterson. These are leading up to the release of Cytonic, the third book in the Skyward series, and so I wanted to give these a read before that book came out. Now, I do want to say, from what it sounds like, these take place concurrently to the events of Cytonic. I don't know that for sure, because obviously I don't know what's going to happen in Cytonic, but that's kind of how they were described, as being what's going on with the rest of the team while the events of Cytonic are happening. There is a third novella that's coming out, which is something Beach, I think. I can't remember what it's called, but there is a third novella that is coming out in December afterwards, so I imagine that one is going to kind of happen after Cytonic, but these two are supposed to be beforehand, so I decided to give them a read. I thought it was a good way to lead up. Normally, I like to do, for Sanderson's books, a reread of the earlier books before, but the Skyward series, they weren't like overly complex books, and so I still remembered it pretty well, and so figured I would do these. I didn't really have a lot of problem, so it seemed like it was okay without a reread. But let's talk about these, because these were something interesting because of the fact that they're not following Spensa. Like I said, this is kind of the rest of the team. The first one, Sunreach, is specifically following FM, and she's one of the members of the Skyward Flight, and we get to find out more about her in general and just kind of see things from her perspective, and that's what a lot of this did. I feel like these worked well because it was able to give a lot more character development to the other members of Skyward Flight instead of just Spensa, because especially with book 2 of the series taking place pretty much entirely somewhere else, without them, we kind of hadn't gotten a lot more to go on, so this was a good way to kind of bring them back in slowly. And both of these novellas did very much still have a nice plot and had a satisfactory ending to each one as well. So this wasn't something where it's just strictly leading up. Like, these tell their own stories, which was pretty cool. With FM, we get more of a look at what's going on back on Detritus. We get to see kind of the interactions of the characters, and we also get to see how people look and view, in general, Spensa, which was interesting as well. But there's still a ton going on, because at the end of the second book, Starsight, obviously things had gone a little bit wrong for Spensa, and so the realities of that, and the humans on Detritus being in contact with the superiority for the first time, a lot going on there. But we also, of course, had the interactions with Alanik, who was kind of the basis of how we start the plot of Starsight. And so the second novella, ReDawn, is actually from Alanik's point of view, which I thought was very interesting, because Alanik is, although humanoid, a different species and an alien coming from a planet that, like, many years ago, apparently was allied with the humans back when they were on Earth, before the events that happened that ended up leaving a group of them basically on Detritus. And so we get to see kind of similar plot lines, but happening from two wildly different perspectives. It was pretty entertaining seeing Alanik's, like, basically views of humanity. We got that a bit with Spensa, where she was figuring out all of the alien stuff. So seeing an alien point of view looking at, like, human things was pretty interesting, trying to figure out human terms and the way things are done, and there was a lot of levity that came from kind of those interactions as well. And both of these do have quite a lot of humor and really good dialogue and a lot throughout. Now, I'm not familiar with Janci Patterson's other work. I'm a bit curious now, just because I was worried at first that having two authors and having something co-authored from Sanderson would not quite feel the same, just because I really do enjoy Sanderson's work, obviously. And I hadn't really read anything from him that was co-authored, but I thought it worked really well, because there were some elements that I think seemed to come from Janci, with just things that I hadn't seen before in Sanderson books, and, like, nothing that's, like, huge and, like, really easy to point out, like, he didn't write that or anything like that. Just some elements, some of the dialogue and the humor that came in felt like it was from a slightly different perspective, and I thought it really worked, especially, once again, since these books are from a different POV. So you're not having somebody else help write a character's point of view that's already been established. You're seeing these, established characters, FM more so than Alanik, but that are specifically going in and you were getting their POV for the first time. So I thought that worked really well. I did enjoy both of these, and I am excited to read Cytonic. I don't typically read YA, but I had made an exception for these books, basically, because Sanderson wrote them, and I'll read most anything that he puts out. They're pretty fun, and they do a lot because there's a ton of like really interesting plot with the premise of these books that started way back with Defending Elysium, which was the original novella or short story that Sanderson wrote many, many years ago, that took place hundreds of years, at least, before this series starts. And I was really interested in the core concept. So reading that, it definitely didn't feel like it was something that probably would have been taken to more of a YA route, but I think it works because you're still getting the interesting like science and tech and like the mysterious elements of kind of learning more about these powers that people have, but you're doing it in a more easy to understand fashion. So you don't get a ton of hard science here. A lot of it is explained in simpler ways, but in world it does mostly work. And so it's kind of a good thing to read something different, read something that's definitely science fiction, and you've got space battles and all of this kind of stuff going on too, but it also introduces a lot of interesting elements, and there's a lot of back and forth with just kind of looking at where it doesn't come across necessarily quite as commentary. In some places it definitely seems like it's commentary, but really more so exploring the idea of differing peoples, which we get with humans meeting aliens, but more so we have the humans who are fighting a war against a superiority, just trying to not be exterminated, the way they view things versus the way that Alanic's planet ReDawn and the way they view the superiority, and just kind of the differences. And looking at how even groups of people, and it applies back to Earth, groups of people in similar situations may look at things very completely differently, and how cultural differences can have a huge impact of that in generally looking at it. And there's a lot of kind of discussion and exploration of the idea of being peaceful and what peace always means, and kind of like forcing people into peace and that sort of thing. So you can definitely find some commentary there if you're looking at it, but it's done really well in just a way of exploring the world and exploring the different themes, so that it never comes across as like that's the point of it. This is telling a fun story, but there are a lot of interesting elements to it. I will say, one thing I want to note is there were a few times in both of these where, even though the dialogue was fun, it seemed like there was a little bit too much levity for the situation. There were some situations where you would think the character would be a lot more serious about things. And this did actually happen, oddly enough, more so for me in ReDawn, where Alanic would be like just fascinated with some base thing, or like start kind of like trying to joke and like prod into like an aspect of humanity because it was amusing to her at pretty serious times. I think that could, to an extent, be explained away by just like nervousness, or still just being like astounded by having these new people to explore, but we don't really see that from the humans as much, so that kind of felt a little odd. There were some times like that as well in the first novella also, where it just seemed like, I get that you're putting in levity because it's meant for a younger audience, but it's okay to have the serious times as well. And so this did end on somewhat of the cycle on a pretty serious note, and it's definitely building up to more things that are going to come. So it wasn't like it was completely nothing's taken seriously, but that just happened a few times. The thing is, though, one of the also strengths of this is the dialogue and the character interactions, which are quite a lot of fun. And you getting all the different characters interacting, the flight members, and then interacting with aliens. There's just some jokes that come from the cultural differences as well. There are a few jokes that just kind of like, once again, not quite commentary, but it was definitely there. There's a specific joke about pronouns, because there's an alien that the pronoun is they, because they are neither male or human by human standards. And so there's like the comment about how they call somebody like a he or she, and they and it's explained, and everybody's like, oh, we got to figure this out. So there was a joke there that was funny. There was actually a really like little Easter egg nod to Token in there, and I won't go into too much detail. It's not really a spoiler because it doesn't relate to the plot at all, but it was just kind of a fun nod to things that have happened in the past, and I thought it was pretty funny, just with that as well. So there were just these nods to like real world issues that are being interpreted a very different way because of the fact that we're dealing with all kinds of different life forms. And that was really something that was talked about more so in Starsight, where there was a lot more exploration of all of these incredibly different kinds of beings. But there was still some of that here, where it's done in a really light way, but it's still kind of pointing things out and showing, the differences and showing people trying to figure out how to work with other life forms that are completely different than them. And just the ideas of teamwork is a big one as well, and sacrifice, and just the different ways that different peoples look at things. So like I said, nothing ever came off as preachy, but there's definitely a lot of the exploration here that, even though it's in a very different setting, it's themes that you can really apply to look at with, not just assuming everybody of a certain culture or race or anything is all exactly going to be the same, or like having all these preconceived notions. And we get a lot of that with the humans and with the aliens, really just not knowing how to react to each other at all. In Starsight, there was the very specific thing where one of the aliens was trying to smile because they'd heard that humans smiled as like a friendly gesture, and Spencer took it as just like absolutely creepy because that's the way it seemed. So there's a lot of that where there can be a lot of miscommunication, some unintentional, and a lot in there. And like I said, I thought these did a really good job with being fun and light and entertaining, but also bringing in a lot of these real world like topics to explore in a sci-fi setting. And also, once again, I have to say, I was very pleased with how both of these ended. They both had a self-contained story, despite these being pretty short. And there were some things that felt a little bit rushed. We do go through some kind of like time jumps in there as well, which I think was just necessary for it, but it did not feel nearly as forced. We got things explained in a pretty natural way to like what's happened over this time or why things are suddenly different. So it did a good job of really fitting in these whole arcs that were relevant, I imagine, to what's going to happen in Cytonic, but also were just relevant, and they were arcs for these people, and there was a ton going on. So these weren't just like kind of side novellas, which isn't something Brandon Sanderson normally does. Usually his novellas, like the ones he does for Storyline, are very relevant or even vital to the plot. And these were done in an interesting way to still be very relevant to the plot that's coming, but make it so that if you would read Cytonic first and then read these after, I don't think it would affect that at all or make these less good, because they're happening at the same time. And I imagine there'll be some sort of crossover at some point. And like I said, I assume the third novella is going to take place after Cytonic, based on it being released after. But these are something you can read in and just kind of know more background of what's happening. But Cytonic, I think, will still do some different things. And the fourth book, too, because I know there's supposed to be 4, will probably really bring everything back together. I don't know if there'll be more novellas whenever we get to that point. But it was interesting, and I thought it worked well. I tend to be a little bit skeptical with novellas because it can be difficult to tell a whole story and not go into the things where like you're just rushing, or like the resolution feels super rushed. So these were telling important stories, but it was also done in a way where we could still accomplish something. I think it does help that these are, set within where there's going to be more explored later. But it worked really, really well for just exploring something and looking at a specific arc for each novella. These do happen one right after the other. The second novella does take place directly after the first, but both of them have a specific arc and are from a specific viewpoint. So I thought that was just really well done with both of these, and I did enjoy the read of both. So those are really my thoughts on these. Like I said, they were fun and they were light, but still well written. And I'll be interested to see what Janci Patterson has written. I assume she's written other things. I don't really know. I'm not familiar with her, but I will definitely be interested to check that out, just because this was a good experience with both of them. Make sure to let me know if you have read or are going to read these, if you're planning on reading Cytonic. I am planning on reading it basically as soon as I get it. It shouldn't take me that long to get through, and then having a review out for it very, very shortly after. So watch out for that if you're interested. I don't know if I'll do a review for the third novella, just because I did this one for the first 2, and it's still not a super long video. So it will just depend if I have enough to say, or maybe I'll try and tag it on later to something else, or just talk about it in a wrap up, but I'll have to see. But let me know on those. Make sure to give the video a like if you enjoyed it. Check the link in the description for the Wizardly Duo Discord if you want to chat books or anything else. It's always a blast there, and we would love to have you. And of course, if you'd like to see more of my content, make sure to subscribe.